The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves, and light from 1,000 different suns filtered through windows made of compressed diamond. For 12,000 years, this chamber had been the center of all power in the known universe. 17 elder species ruled from here, and their word was law across 50,000 worlds. High Chancellor Koros sat upon his throne of living stone, his ancient body crackling with each small movement. He had ruled the council for 300 years, and in all that time, he had never faced a true challenge. War was a forgotten concept, something that primitive species engaged in before they learned better. The council did not fight wars. They simply enforced compliance, and no species had ever been foolish enough to resist until now. Ambassador Deleth of the Verati Collective walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. Her skin was translucent, showing the blue blood that pumped through her veins, and right now that skin flickered with patterns of deep concern. She carried a data crystal in her 3-fingered hand, and every representative in the chamber could see that something was very wrong. "High Chancellor," she said, her voice echoing through the vast space. "I bring troubling news from the Outer Rim. The species known as humans has formally rejected our terms of integration." A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. The Mendari delegate, a creature whose body flowed like living mercury, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Rejected. Young Ambassador, no species rejects the Council. We offer them everything. Protection from cosmic threats. Access to technology that took us millions of years to develop. Trade routes that span the galaxy. What could possibly make them refuse?" Xyleth activated the data crystal, and a holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a human male in a military uniform, his face hard and unyielding. "This is their response to our offer." The human spoke, and his words filled the chamber. "The people of Earth and her colonies thank the Galactic Council for their generous offer. However, we must decline. We will not surrender our military vessels. We will not disband our armed forces. We will not allow foreign oversight of our government. We are a free people, and we intend to remain free. If the Council cannot accept this, then we have nothing more to discuss." The recording ended, and silence fell over the chamber. Then, slowly, laughter began to spread. The Kasari representative, a tall insectoid creature with compound eyes, clicked his mandibles in amusement. These creatures have been spacefaring for barely 300 years. They control perhaps 40 star systems. Their technology is primitive compared to our own, and they think they can defy 17 civilizations that have ruled the stars since before their ancestors climbed down from the trees. High Chancellor Koros did not laugh. Something about the human's eyes bothered him, though he could not say exactly what. There was a hardness there, a certainty that seemed out of place in a representative of such a young and weak species. But he pushed the thought aside. The Council had crushed 100 rebellions over the millennia. This would be no different. "Send the compliance fleet," he ordered. "Give them 90 standard days to reconsider. If they do not, we will teach them the same lesson we have taught every other species that forgot its place. 12,000 light-years away, in a bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains of Earth." Admiral Catherine Price watched the same recording that the Council had just seen. She was 54 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and a face that had been hardened by decades of military service. She had fought in 3 wars before humanity ever reached the stars, and she had seen things that would break most people. But she had never stopped fighting, and she never would. "The Council has accepted our refusal," she said to the officers gathered around her. "They are sending a compliance fleet, 300 capital ships, 2,000 support craft. They expect us to surrender or be destroyed." Commander Daniel Hughes, her executive officer, studied the tactical display with worried eyes. "Admiral, our entire Navy consists of 62 combat-capable vessels. Even with our technological improvements, those odds are impossible." Catherine smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "Those are the ships they know about, Commander." She walked to the main display and entered a code that only 7 people in all of human space knew. The screen changed, showing hidden shipyards scattered throughout the asteroid belt. concealed bases on moons that surveys had marked as uninhabited, factory complexes buried so deep underground that no sensor could detect them. 300 years we have been preparing for this moment. From the day we first made contact with the Council, we knew this day would come. They see us as primitives, as children who need to be controlled for our own good. They have never even considered the possibility that we might be something else entirely. Lieutenant Amy Crawford, the youngest officer in the room, stared at the display with wide eyes. How many ships do we actually have? When the Lazarus Protocol is fully activated, we will field over 800 combat vessels. But that is not our true advantage. Catherine changed the display again, showing weapon systems that looked nothing like anything the Council had ever seen. The Council has not fought a real war in 12,000 years. They have forgotten what war actually means. They think it is about numbers and firepower and making your enemy submit. She turned to face her officers, and her eyes burned with cold fire. We know better. Humanity has been fighting wars since we first picked up rocks and sharpened sticks. We have killed each other with swords and guns and nuclear weapons. We have refined the art of destruction over thousands of years of bloody conflict. The Council thinks they are dealing with primitives who will break at the first show of force. Catherine walked to the window that looked out over the underground command center, where thousands of personnel worked at stations that controlled humanity's secret military machine. They are about to learn what happens when you corner a species that has turned war into a science. Begin activation of the Lazarus Protocol. Send word to all hidden facilities. Wake our sleeping fleet. Throughout human space, ancient machinery began to stir. Shipyards that had been dark for decades lit up with the fire of fusion reactors. Automated factories started their production lines, churning out missiles and beam weapons and armor plating. Men and women who had trained in secret for their entire adult lives received the call they had been waiting for and reported 2 ships that officially did not exist. The Galactic Council had given humanity 90 days to submit. They expected fear and negotiation and eventual surrender. They expected the humans to realize that resistance was futile and accept their place in the galactic order. They had no idea what was coming. In the darkness between stars, humanity began to wake. The galaxy would never be the same again. 60 days had passed since the Council issued their ultimatum, and panic was spreading through the crystal halls of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Steleth stood before the assembled representatives once again. But this time her translucent skin had gone almost white with fear. The data she carried was impossible, and yet their spies had confirmed it 3 times. Our intelligence networks have been monitoring human space continuously since the ultimatum was delivered, she said, her voice trembling slightly. What we have observed defies explanation. Human industrial output has increased by 4,000% in 2 months. Ships are appearing from locations that our surveys marked as empty space. Our current estimates place their naval strength at over 800 vessels, with more appearing every day. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted questions and accusations. The Mendari delegate had lost all trace of his earlier amusement, his mercury body rippling with agitation. This is impossible. No species can increase production that quickly. They would need shipyards that we never detected, factories that have been operating in secret for centuries. Yes, Zeleth said quietly. That is exactly what they had. High Chancellor Koros rose from his throne, and the chamber fell silent. His stone body moved slowly, but there was something different in his posture now. Something that might have been the first stirring of genuine concern. You are telling me that the humans have been deceiving us since the moment we first made contact with them? It appears so, High Chancellor. They presented themselves as a young and primitive species, eager to learn from their elders. They asked questions about our technology and our history. They traded with us and signed agreements and behaved exactly as we expected a minor species to behave. And all the while, they were building a war machine in secret. Speaker Vaughn of the Tesserae rose to address the Council. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds, their ability to see patterns that others missed. I have been studying human history since this crisis began. What I have found is deeply disturbing. He activated his own data crystal, and images began to appear in the center of the chamber. They showed human wars throughout the ages, from ancient battles fought with swords and spears, to the devastating nuclear exchanges that had nearly destroyed their civilization before they reached the stars. "The humans are not like us," Varn said. "They are not like any species we have encountered. They have fought among themselves almost continuously for their entire existence. They have developed weapons of mass destruction and actually use them against their own kind. They have a concept they call total war, which means the complete mobilization of a society for the purpose of destroying an enemy." The images continued, showing human soldiers fighting in trenches filled with poison gas, cities burning under aerial bombardment, mushroom clouds rising over ruined landscapes. "We thought they were primitive because they had not evolved beyond violence. We were wrong. They have not evolved beyond violence because violence is their natural state. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and we have just given them a reason to turn that violence against us." High Chancellor Koros stared at the images, and for the first time in 300 years of rule, he felt something that might have been fear. "Can we still defeat them?" Varn hesitated before answering. "I do not know. Our fleet outnumbers theirs, but they have had 3 centuries to study our tactics and our technology. They know our weaknesses, and we know nothing about theirs. We are walking into a fight that we do not understand, against an enemy that has been preparing for this moment since before we knew they existed." Far across the galaxy, Admiral Catherine Price stood on the bridge of the Endurance, flagship of Earth's first strike fleet. Around her, officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency, and through the viewport, she could see dozens of warships moving into formation. These were the vessels that the Council knew about, the official navy that had always been intended as a decoy. "Admiral, we have confirmation from all sectors," Commander Hughes reported. "The Lazarus Protocol is ahead of schedule. Total fleet strength is now 847 combat vessels, with another 200 in final assembly." Catherine nodded, but her attention was focused on a single ship displayed on her tactical screen. The Achilles, humanity's ultimate weapon, was completing her final preparations in the deepest shipyard humanity possessed. 12 kilometers of armor and weapons, engines that could outrun anything in the Council fleet, and firepower that would make the elder species question everything they thought they knew about war. "What is the status of Captain Cole's readiness assessment?" "He reports all systems operational. The Achilles can deploy within 6 hours of receiving orders." Catherine allowed herself a small smile. Benjamin Cole was one of the finest officers she had ever served with, a former fighter pilot who'd earned his reputation in the brutal colonial rebellions that had shaped humanity's early expansion into space. If anyone could handle the Achilles, it was him. On the bridge of the Achilles herself, Captain Cole walked among his crew, checking systems and offering words of encouragement. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Park, fell into step beside him as he made his rounds. "The crew is ready, Captain. Morale is high, and everyone knows what is at stake." Cole looked out at the stars through the Achilles' massive viewport. "Do they understand what we are about to do, Commander? We are not just going to fight the Council. We are going to change the galaxy forever. After today, nothing will ever be the same." Lisa considered the question carefully before answering. "I think they understand that we have no choice. The Council would never have let us remain free. They see independence as a threat to their order. Sooner or later, they would have come for us regardless of what we said or did." "True enough." Cole turned to face her, and his eyes were hard with determination. "But there is more to it than survival. The Council has ruled the galaxy through fear for 12,000 years. They have crushed every species that tried to resist them. We are going to show them that their time is over. We are going to prove that their power was always an illusion, built on the compliance of species that had forgotten how to fight." Across human space, similar conversations were happening on hundreds of ships. Young officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment checked their weapons and reviewed their tactics. Veterans of humanity's earlier wars offered advice and steadied nerves. Engineers made final adjustments to systems that had been designed specifically to counter Council technology The Compliance fleet was still 10 days from the border of human space. They were coming with 300 capital ships, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They expected to find a frightened and outmatched enemy. Ready to negotiate or be destroyed, they had no idea that humanity had been waiting for them. For 300 years, in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Price received the final reports from her fleet commanders. Everything was in position. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. "Send the final message to the Council fleet," she ordered. "Tell them we will not surrender. Tell them we will not negotiate. Tell them that if they enter human space, they will find a war unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen." She turned to look at the tactical display one last time, at the hundreds of green icons that represented human warships waiting in the darkness. "And tell them that we are looking forward to it." The Compliance fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. 300 capital ships arranged in the perfect formation that had served the Council for millennia. Their hulls gleamed with the advanced alloys of 17 combined civilizations. Their weapons could crack planets open like eggs. Fleet Commander Naxos of the Khazari stood on his bridge, his compound eyes surveying the tactical display with cold satisfaction. "Transmit the final demand for surrender," he ordered, his mandibles clicking with each word. "Give them 1 hour to respond before we begin our advance." His communications officer obeyed, sending the standard ultimatum that had preceded every Council enforcement action for 12,000 years. The message was simple: submit or be destroyed. Accept the Council's authority or watch your worlds burn. No species had ever chosen destruction before, and Naxos did not expect the humans to be any different. The response came in less than 5 minutes. "And it was not surrender, Fleet Commander? We are receiving a transmission from the human forces. It contains only a single word." Naxos tilted his head, confusion evident in his body language. "What word?" The communications officer hesitated, as if uncertain whether to deliver the message. Remember, before Naxos could ask what that could possibly mean, alarms began screaming across every ship in his fleet. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear as vessels began appearing from directions that should have been impossible. Human ships emerged from behind the Compliance fleet, around it, and in some cases directly within its formation. They came from angles that Council navigation computers insisted could not be used for travel, through dimensions of space that were supposed to be theoretical abstractions. "All ships. Defensive formation," Naxos commanded. But there was a tremor in his voice that had never been there before. "Concentrate fire on the nearest hostile vessels." The Council ships began to move, their practiced formations shifting to meet the unexpected threat. But the humans did not give them time to organize. The first volley of human weapons struck before the Council ships had completed their maneuvers, and the results were devastating. Missiles that fragmented into thousands of independently. Targeting warheads overwhelmed point defense systems designed to handle much simpler threats. Energy beams burned through shields that had been considered impenetrable, operating on frequencies that Council scientists had never even theorized. Kinetic projectiles traveling at a significant fraction of light speed punched through armor like it was made of paper in the first 3 minutes of the battle. 40 Council ships ceased to exist. On the bridge of the Endurance, Admiral Catherine Price watched the engagement unfold with grim satisfaction. Her fleet had rehearsed this battle 1,000 times in simulation, and the real thing was going exactly as planned. The Council commanders were fighting the way they had always fought, using tactics that had worked against every previous enemy. They had no idea how to handle an opponent who had spent 3 centuries studying those tactics and developing counters for every one of them. "Enemy formation is fragmenting," Commander Hughes reported. "Their command structure is breaking down. Individual ship captains are beginning to act independently." "Expected," Catherine said. "The Council has never faced a real challenge. When their standard approaches fail, they have no backup plans. Order the Second Fleet to begin their flanking maneuver. Let us tighten the noose." Across the battlefield, human ships moved with coordination that the Council forces could not match. They fought in small groups that supported each other, covering weaknesses and exploiting opportunities. Every captain knew exactly what their role was, and they executed their orders with the precision that came from years of training and preparation. Fleet Commander Naxos watched, his fleet being torn apart, and felt something he had never experienced in his long career: despair. His flagship shuddered as another human weapon struck her shields, and damage reports were flooding in from every section of the vessel. "We must retreat," his executive officer said, the words seeming to physically pain him. "We cannot win this battle. If we stay, we will be destroyed to the last ship." Naxos knew his officer was right, but retreat was not something Council fleets did. In 12,000 years of enforcement actions, no compliance fleet had ever fled from an enemy. The shame would follow him for the rest of his life, but the alternative was death, and not just for him. Every being on every ship in his fleet was depending on him to make the right decision. All ships prepare to withdraw. Maximum speed to the hyperspace limit. The order went out, and the surviving Council vessels began to turn away from the battle. But before they could engage their hyperspace drives, something new appeared on their sensors. Something that made even the most experienced officers stop and stare in disbelief. The Achilles emerged from a dimension of space that Council science said did not exist. 12 kilometers of death and destruction, bristling with weapons that looked more like the creations of mad gods than the products of engineering. She was larger than some space stations, more heavily armed than entire fleets, and she positioned herself directly between the Council survivors and their escape route. Captain Benjamin Cole sat in his command chair, watching the enemy ships try to comprehend what they were seeing. His crew worked around him with quiet efficiency, their stations showing green across the board. The Achilles was ready to do what she had been built to do. "Open a channel to the enemy fleet," he ordered. "All frequencies." His communications officer complied, and Cole began to speak. His words were carried to every Council ship, to every officer and crew member who had come to teach humanity its place in the galactic order. "I am Captain Benjamin Cole of the Earth warship Achilles. You came here expecting to find a primitive species ready to submit to your authority. Instead, you have found something very different." He paused, letting his words sink in across the damaged and demoralized enemy fleet. "We are the species that invented war. Not conflict, not competition, but true war in all its terrible glory. We have spent our entire existence perfecting the art of destruction. We have turned the killing of our enemies into a science that you cannot begin to comprehend." The Achilles' primary weapon array began to glow, energy building to levels that the Council sensors could barely measure. "You have been given a lesson today. Your compliance fleet, which you believe to be invincible, has been shattered by a force less than a third its size. You have seen technology that your scientists will spend decades trying to understand. And now you will carry that lesson home to your masters." A single beam of energy lanced out from the Achilles, striking Fleet Commander Naxos' flagship. The vessel did not explode in any conventional sense. It simply came apart, converted instantly to plasma and scattered atoms as if it had never existed at all. "That was your fleet commander," Cole continued, his voice flat and hard. "He died because your Council chose to threaten my people. Run home now. Tell the High Chancellor what you have seen. Tell him that this was a warning, a demonstration of what we can do when we choose restraint."
Ow.
The Achilles moved aside, opening a path to the hyperspace limit. "The next time we meet, there will be no warning. There will be no survivors. There will only be the silence that follows when a species forgets that some enemies are better left alone." The surviving Council ships fled, their drives pushed beyond safe limits in their desperation to escape. 87 vessels out of 300 made it to hyperspace. The rest were debris, expanding clouds of wreckage that would drift through space for eternity as a monument to the Council's arrogance on the Endurance. Admiral Price allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she watched the enemy retreat. The first battle was won, but she knew that the war was far from over. The Council would not accept this defeat quietly. They would come again, with more ships and more determination. But humanity would be ready. They had been ready for 300 years. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Victory is ours. But stay alert. This is only the beginning." The news of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Communication networks that had carried nothing but routine traffic for millennia suddenly burned with reports of the impossible. The Compliance Fleet, the instrument of Council authority for 12,000 years, had been shattered by a species that most galactic citizens had never even heard of. The survivors told stories that seemed like fever dreams. Tales of weapons that defied physics and a ship so large it had its own gravity. On Nexus Prime, the Council gathered in emergency session for the first time in living memory. The crystal chamber that had always radiated confidence and power now felt cold and uncertain. Representatives who had spent their careers debating trade agreements and cultural exchanges found themselves facing questions that no one had needed to ask for millennia. High Chancellor. Koro sat upon his throne, but his stone body seemed diminished somehow, as if the weight of recent events had cracked something fundamental inside him. How many ships survived? Ambassador Xyleth delivered the answer that everyone already knew, but no one wanted to hear. 87 out of 300 capital vessels. Approximately 400 support craft out of 2,000. Total casualties exceed 2 million sentient beings. Silence filled the chamber. 2 million dead. The number was almost impossible to comprehend for species that had known nothing but peace for thousands of years. "We must retaliate," the Khazari representative said, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "We must gather the full might of all 17 civilizations and crush these humans before they grow any stronger." With what? The Mendari delegate had lost all his usual fluid grace, his mercury body roiling with barely contained fear. "We sent 300 ships and lost 213 of them. How many would we lose if we sent 1,000? 3,000? At what point do we admit that we cannot win this war?" Speaker Varn of the Tesseri rose to address the chamber, his analytical mind having processed the battle data while others were still reeling from the shock. "The question of whether we can win is no longer relevant. The humans have demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything we possess. Their weapons operate on principles we do not understand. Their tactics assume a level of individual initiative and adaptability that our forces cannot match. Most importantly, they have been preparing for this conflict for 3 centuries, while we did not even know they were a threat." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We have 2 choices. We can continue this war and watch our fleets be destroyed one by one until we have nothing left. Or we can negotiate while we still have something to negotiate with." Koros made a sound that might have been disbelief. "The Council does not negotiate with defiant species. We impose order. We enforce compliance. That is what we have always done." "What we have always done no longer works," Varn replied simply. "The humans have changed the rules. We can either adapt to the new reality or be destroyed by it." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, there was only one possible conclusion. The Council sent a message to Earth requesting a diplomatic meeting. The response came within a day. Humanity would send an envoy to Nexus Prime. 1 week later, diplomatic vessel Glory emerged from hyperspace in orbit around the Council's capital world. She was escorted by 50 human warships that took up positions around the planet, their weapons powered down but their presence unmistakable. The Council had invited humanity to talk, but humanity was making sure everyone understood that they came as equals, not as supplicants. Ambassador Laura Bennett was 60 years old. With silver hair and eyes that had seen humanity through its most difficult moments of first contact with alien species, she had negotiated treaties that prevented wars and agreements that opened new paths for human expansion. But as she stepped off the shuttle onto Nexus Prime's landing platform, she knew that this would be the most important negotiation of her life. Marine guards empowered. Armor flanked her as she walked through the crystal corridors toward the Council chamber. Alien species watched her pass, their expressions ranging from fear to curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Laura ignored them all. She had a job to do. Nothing was going to distract her from it. The Council chamber was even more impressive than the intelligence reports had suggested. Laura allowed herself a moment to appreciate the architecture before focusing on the 17 representatives who waited for her. They sat in a semicircle of elevated platforms, looking down at the small human woman who had come to speak with them. High Chancellor Koros spoke first, his voice echoing through the vast space. Ambassador Bennett, you come to us after an act of unprecedented aggression. Your species has killed millions of Council citizens and violated every principle of galactic law. Laura smiled, and there was no warmth in it. With respect, High Chancellor, your compliance fleet was sent to force a sovereign species into submission. We declined to be forced. The casualties on both sides are the direct result of your government's decision to use military power against a people who had done nothing to harm you. You refused integration. You rejected the Council's authority. It's because your authority over us was never legitimate in the first place. Laura activated a holographic display showing images of human history. When we first encountered your civilization, we recognized what you were. An empire that had grown comfortable in its power. Rulers who had forgotten that authority must be earned, not simply claimed. She'll let the images continue, showing the development of human civilization, the wars and struggles that had shaped humanity into what it was. We learned from you. We studied your technology and your politics. We mapped your strengths and your weaknesses. And we prepared for the day when you would try to do to us what you have done to every other species that refused to bow. Xylith's skin flickered with distress. What do you want from us? Change, Laura said simply. The galaxy cannot continue as it has. You claim to represent civilization, but your civilization is built on the subjugation of anyone who disagrees with you. You offer species a choice between submission and destruction, and you call this peace. She turned to face the full assembly, meeting the eyes of each representative in turn. Humanity will not be subjugated. We have made that clear. But we also do not wish to become what you are. We have no interest in building an empire or ruling the galaxy. What we want is something that has not existed in this galaxy for 12,000 years. True freedom. The right of every species to determine its own destiny without the threat of destruction hanging over them? And if we refuse? Koros asked, though his voice lacked the confidence it had held at the beginning of the meeting. Now then the war continues. And I think we both know how that war will end. Laura's expression softened slightly. But I do not believe you will refuse, High Chancellor. You are not fools. You have seen what we can do when we are provoked. The question you must ask yourselves is whether the system you have built for 12,000 years is worth the cost of trying to preserve it. Against an enemy you cannot defeat, the Council. Representatives looked at each other, and in their expressions, Laura could see the beginning of something new. Not acceptance, not yet, but the first cracks in the certainty that had defined their civilization for millennia. We will need time to discuss this among ourselves, Koros said finally. Laura nodded. Take the time you need, but understand that while you deliberate, our fleet remains in position. We came here in good faith, hoping to find a peaceful resolution, but we are prepared for any outcome. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her guards falling into step behind her. The Council watched her go in silence, each representative lost in their own thoughts about what this small human woman had just said. The galaxy was changing, whether they wanted it to or not. The only question was whether they would change with it or be swept away. The Council deliberated for 3 days. Representatives argued and debated through sessions that stretched for hours without breaks. Some demanded continued resistance, calling for the mobilization of every ship and every soldier across 17 civilizations. Others pointed to the wreckage of the compliance fleet and asked, what good more ships would do against an enemy that had already proven itself unstoppable. In the end, reality won the argument. The Treaty of Nexus Prime was signed on the 4th day. Ambassador Laura Bennett stood at the center of the council chamber, surrounded by representatives of species that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and watched as High Chancellor Koros affixed his mark to a document that would reshape civilization itself. The terms were comprehensive. The Council would continue to exist, but no longer as the supreme authority of galactic affairs. Instead, it would serve as a forum for cooperation and discussion among equals. Species would be free to maintain their own military forces. govern their own worlds, and pursue their own destinies without fear of compliance fleets or enforcement actions. The era of submission was over. "This is not defeat," Koro said as he completed the signing. "This is evolution. Perhaps the Council has been stagnant for too long. Perhaps we needed something to shake us out of our complacency." Laura nodded respectfully. "Growth often comes from adversity, High Chancellor. Humanity learned that lesson through thousands of years of struggle. Now the galaxy will have the chance to learn it as well." Across human space, the news was received with celebrations that lasted for days. In the streets of Earth's great cities, people danced and cheered and embraced strangers. On the colony worlds that had been preparing for possible invasion, soldiers laid down their weapons and joined the festivities. Humanity had faced its greatest test and emerged victorious. President Marcus Sullivan addressed the planet from Geneva. Standing on the steps of the United Nations building that had been rebuilt after the last great war of human history, his words were carried to every world where humans lived and to many worlds beyond. "Today we have proven that humanity will never bow to those who would take our freedom. We faced an empire that has ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and we stood our ground. Not because we wanted war, but because we understood that some things are worth fighting for." He paused, looking out at the crowd that stretched as far as he could see. "But our victory brings with it a responsibility. The galaxy is watching us now. They want to know what kind of species we really are. Will we become another empire, using our power to dominate those weaker than ourselves? Will we repeat the mistakes of the Council and build a new system of control?" Sullivan shook his head slowly. "No, we will be something the galaxy has never seen. A species that could conquer but chooses not to. A people who understand that true strength is not measured by the enemies you destroy, but by the freedom you protect. We have won the right to shape the future. Now, let us prove ourselves worthy of that right." On the Achilles, still stationed at the edge of human territory, Captain Benjamin Cole watched the celebrations through the ship's communication feeds. His executive officer, Commander Lisa Park, stood beside him on the observation deck, both of them silent as they contemplated what they had helped to achieve. "We built this ship to destroy enemies," Cole said finally. 12 kilometers of weapons and armor, designed for nothing but war. Now the war is over. What do we do with her now?" Lisa considered the question. "Maybe that is the point. The best weapon is one you never have to use again. The Achilles exists so that no one will ever again think they can threaten humanity without consequences." Cole nodded slowly. "A deterrent. Not a sword, but a shield, and a reminder," Lisa added. "To us, as much as to anyone else. We have the power to destroy civilizations. That means we have the responsibility to make sure we never do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. The Achilles was more than a ship. She was a statement about what humanity could be when pushed to extremes. Now humanity had to prove that they could be something more than warriors across the galaxy. The effects of the treaty were beginning to ripple outward. Species that had lived under Council authority for generations were learning what freedom meant. Some embraced it eagerly, throwing off restrictions that had chafed for centuries. Others were more cautious, uncertain how to function without the guidance that had defined their existence. On 100 worlds, debates raged about what the new order would look like. Old rivalries that had been suppressed by Council authority began to resurface. Opportunities that had been closed for millennia suddenly opened. Ambassador Bennett remained on Nexus Prime for another month, helping to establish the frameworks that would guide the transition. She worked alongside Council representatives who were still adjusting to their new reality, trying to build bridges between the old order and the new. "You have created chaos," Speaker Varn told her during one of their many meetings. "The stability that we maintained for 12,000 years is gone. Species that have never known conflict will now have to learn how to navigate a galaxy without rules." Laura smiled. "Stability built on oppression is not real stability. It is just control by another name. Yes, there will be challenges. There will probably be conflicts. But those conflicts will be between equals, not between masters and subjects. And out of those challenges, something better will emerge." Varn considered her words. You have great faith in the nature of sentient beings. Not faith, Laura said. Experience. Humanity has been through every kind of conflict imaginable. We have nearly destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. And yet here we are, still standing, still growing, still reaching for something better. If we can do it, so can the rest of the galaxy. 6 months after the treaty was signed, Admiral Catherine Price stood on a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She had retired from active service, her work finally complete. The fleet she had built was now dedicated to exploration and defense, not conquest. The secret shipyards had been decommissioned or converted to civilian use. The war that humanity had prepared for over 3 centuries was over. Commander Daniel Hughes, now promoted to admiral himself, stood beside her. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Catherine thought about the question for a long moment. Regrets? No. Everything we did was necessary. The Council would never have left us alone if we had shown weakness. But I do wonder sometimes what we might have accomplished if all that effort had been directed somewhere else. All those resources, all that genius, dedicated to building weapons, instead of exploring the universe. Maybe now we can find out, Hughes suggested.